Have you ever wondered why David proclaimed, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want"? What if I told you that hidden within Psalm 23 lies a life-changing revelation? This isn't just a verse for comfort, it's a divine blueprint for trust, peace, and provision. Today, we'll uncover the profound secrets of this beloved psalm, challenging how you view faith, trials, and God's promises. Stay with me as we journey through this untapped well of wisdom and discover how it can transform your life forever.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into Psalm 23.
One of the most well-known, I'd say.
Oh, for sure. But we're going beyond a simple reading today. We're really trying to uncover its wisdom and see how we can actually, use it in our daily lives.
Yeah, make it practical.
Yeah, exactly. And, you sent me a transcript from a YouTube video and some of your own notes. So we're going to be pulling from both of those sources. But even before we jump in, I have to admit, the imagery always gets me. I mean, green pastures, still waters, a table in front of your enemies.
Yeah, it's striking.
It's not your typical, feel-good poem,
Definitely not. But I think that's why it's so powerful. It's not about ignoring the hard stuff.
Right.
It's about how we can experience this, abundant life even when things are tough. And it all starts with that first line. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Okay, yeah, it's a familiar line. We've all heard it. But when you really sit with it for a minute, there's a lot there. This isn't just about giving God a cool title.
No, it's so much more. It points to this relationship, a connection.
Exactly. It feels personal.
It is. And to really grasp it, we need to think about shepherds back in David's time. We're not talking about someone watching a flock from miles away. These shepherds, they lived with their sheep. They knew each sheep, intimately. Yeah, they protected them, guided them. It was hands-on, constant care.
That's actually really reassuring when you put it like that.
Yeah.
Because if that's how God cares for us, then, well, I know I feel a lot less anxious about facing the unknown.
I get that. And that's the core of I shall not want, It's trusting that God will provide not just stuff, but what we truly need. Emotionally, spiritually, relationally, the whole picture.
And something that stood out in the source material is that wanting itself can be a roadblock.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We get so caught up in wanting things to be different, wanting this or that it actually prevents us from experiencing contentment.
It's a great point. And we often limit wanting to just material things, but it can be so much broader than that.
Totally. We want different jobs, better relationships, even a different reality than the one we're in.
Exactly. And that's where the challenge comes in, right? How do we reconcile that very human desire to want with this trust in God's provision?
Yeah, is it about just squashing down all our desires? Or is there a healthier way to approach it?
That's a good question. I think it might be more about learning to discern. Discerning between the desires that truly lead to life and the ones that just leave you empty.
Oh, that's good.
Desires rooted in ego versus those aligned with, say, your purpose. Psalm 23 seems to suggest that contentment comes from aligning our wants with God's will, trusting He knows what's best.
It's like letting go of that constant striving and just trusting, which actually brings us to one of the most beautiful images in the psalm. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Talk about an invitation to chill out.
Right. Especially in a world that's constantly pushing us to do more, be more, achieve more.
Ugh, yeah. And it's something I think we both struggle with, right? Finding those moments of quiet, of true rest.
Oh, for sure.
But it's so important. I was reading about how all this research is showing the damaging effects of, constant stress and sleep deprivation. It's like science is finally catching up to what the psalm was saying centuries ago.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And you actually highlighted that in your notes, the tension between the psalm's message and how we live today.
Yeah, it's almost like a countercultural statement. And I think it's important to remember those green pastures and still waters, they're not just literal places.
Right.
It's more about a state of being, this inner peace and spiritual nourishment,
Exactly. Finding those sources of renewal that replenish your soul, that connect you to something larger than yourself.
So how do we find those green pastures in our modern world? What does that look like practically?
It's so individual. Some people find it in nature, others through prayer or meditation. It's about identifying those practices that help you reconnect, both with yourself and with the divine.
And I love how you said it's individual, because something in this source material really resonated with me. I mean, God doesn't meet us where we want to be. He meets us where we are. We don't have to pretend or force it,
I love that.
It's about embracing our own unique needs
Yeah.
and finding what works for us.
Absolutely. And, it's often in those quiet moments, those moments of rest and stillness, that we find the clarity and strength we need to face the tough stuff.
Because let's be real, Psalm 23 doesn't sugarcoat things. It acknowledges that there will be times when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That's powerful stuff.
It is.
And it's where the psalm gets, well, really real. It's not just about fluffy sheep and peaceful meadows.
Right.
We're talking about facing darkness, facing fear, facing the unknown. It's something we all go through at some point.
Absolutely. And in the face of all that, there's this incredible declaration, I will fear no evil.
I mean, that's bold, especially when you're right in the middle of one of those valleys. So what does that even mean, fear no evil? Like, do we just pretend fear doesn't exist?
Well, we're human. We're wired for fear. But maybe it's about recognizing that even when fear is present, even when we're surrounded by darkness, we are not alone.
I love how the speaker in that YouTube video put it. They said, God doesn't need the absence of enemies to bless us. He blesses us right in the middle of it all.
Exactly. It's not about waiting for the storm to pass.
Right.
It's about recognizing His presence right there in the storm, offering comfort and guidance even when we can't see where we're going.
That's a game changer, that shift in perspective. Instead of dwelling on what's wrong or what we're afraid of, we can focus on the fact that God is with us no matter what.
And that brings us to the image of the shepherd's rod and staff, which are often seen as symbols of God's correction and protection.
And in my notes, I actually struggled a bit with this whole correction thing. Like, it's not always a fun concept.
Right.
We naturally resist being corrected, even if it's good for us.
Of course, who enjoys being told they're wrong? But think about it like a loving parent, Sometimes they have to redirect, set boundaries, even discipline. But it always comes from a place of love.
Okay, that's a helpful analogy. So it's not about punishment, it's about guidance, helping us stay on a path that, leads to something good.
Exactly. The rod and the staff, they represent both protection from harm and that gentle, loving guidance to help us grow, to become the best versions of ourselves.
Which makes me think about all the times I've resisted, all the times I ignored that little nudge, only to realize later that, well, God was steering me away from something that wouldn't have been good for me.
Yeah, it's often in hindsight that we see the wisdom in His correction, even if it was hard to understand at the time.
For sure. Which leads us to this next image, and it's one of the most powerful in the whole psalm. A table prepared before us in the presence of our enemies. I mean, how incredible is that?
It's a pretty bold statement. It's like saying, no matter what you're up against, God's got you covered. You're going to be taken care of.
Yeah, bring on the challenge.
Exactly. And it really emphasizes that His blessings aren't dependent on our circumstances. He provides even in the middle of opposition.
It's so encouraging. And that YouTube video, it actually highlighted that point too. God doesn't need our enemies to vanish to bless us. He blesses us right there in the battle.
It's a complete shift in focus. Instead of getting stuck on the obstacles, we can look for those blessings. We can see that prepared table even when things are tough.
I love that. So much to unpack in this psalm.
There really is. Picking up on that idea of dwelling in the house of the Lord. The source material had this really interesting take on it. It suggested it's not just, about heaven in the future.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's more about experiencing that sense of belonging, of security and purpose, like right now.
So it's not just about a final destination. It's about finding that sense of home in our relationship with God in the present.
Yes. Recognizing that we're already dwelling in His presence, surrounded by His love and care, even when things are messy and uncertain.
It's like carrying that peace and security within us, wherever we go, whatever we're facing.
Exactly. And that security changes how we see the tough stuff. Remember those green pastures and still waters we were talking about?
Yeah, such peaceful imagery.
Well, the source material suggests they're not just about finding rest physically or emotionally. It's about a deep spiritual kind of restoration.
Being made whole, renewed, even transformed.
Yes. God's not just putting bandages on us or like gluing the pieces back together. He's working at a deeper level, mending the brokenness in our hearts and souls.
That really resonates with me. There have been times in my life where I felt shattered, like I was broken beyond repair. But through prayer, through seeking God, I've experienced that kind of restoration, that being made whole again.
And that process of restoration, it often goes hand in hand with how we understand righteousness, which the source material also touched on.
Oh, that's interesting, because I think a lot of people, myself included, can get caught up in this idea that righteousness is about achieving some, like, impossible standard of perfection.
Yeah, it can feel like this heavy burden, always trying to be good enough. But Psalm 23, I think it suggests a different way of looking at it. It's not about being sinless or perfectly following all the rules. It's about aligning ourselves with God's will, choosing to walk with Him even when we mess up.
So it's not about being perfect, but about the direction we're facing, the path we're choosing.
Yes. And that path, well, it's going to take us through those valleys we talked about earlier. We're going to face challenges, opposition, those darker seasons of life.
But we're not alone in those valleys. We've got God with us, offering His guidance and protection.
Always. Remember those images, the rod and the staff?
Right, representing God's correction and protection. Although, honestly, that correction part, it can be tough to embrace.
It's natural to resist it. We don't like being told we're wrong or needing to change, but think back to that parent analogy. Sometimes they have to discipline or redirect their child, but it's because they love them and they want what's best.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So instead of seeing correction as punishment, we can see it as an act of love, a way of keeping us on that path that leads to, well, a better life.
A more fulfilling life. And it all circles back to that incredible image, the table prepared in front of our enemies. A powerful declaration that God's blessings, they don't depend on our circumstances.
Right, no matter what you're up against, He's got you covered. You're going to be taken care of.
Exactly. And remember that point from the source material. God doesn't wait for our enemies to disappear to bless us. He blesses us right there in the battle.
It's a total game changer, that shift in focus. Instead of getting bogged down by the obstacles, we can look for the blessings.
See the prepared table, even when things are difficult.
Right.
And it's about trusting that He's working behind the scenes, even when we can't see it. That He's orchestrating events for our good, even when things seem to be falling apart.
It's a powerful reminder to hold on to hope, even in the toughest times, knowing that God's provision is always there.
And remember, that provision, it's not just about the basics. It's about that overflowing cup. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. The source material pointed out that anointing isn't just about being chosen or blessed, but recognizing and living out our purpose.
I love that. It's about connecting with those gifts God's given us, those passions, and using them to make a difference.
Yes. Discovering who we were created to be and stepping into that calling, knowing we're empowered by God.
And the overflowing cup. It's just this beautiful picture of abundance, of God's blessings exceeding what we need and spilling into every part of our lives.
And remember, the source material emphasized that we're not meant to hoard this abundance. It's meant to be shared. We're called to be conduits of His generosity, letting His blessings flow through us and touch others.
Which makes me think of all the ways our own cups overflow. Maybe it's through our talents or our resources or our time, even just offering a listening ear to someone who needs it.
It's about being a blessing to others because we've been blessed. And in sharing that abundance, we not only impact others, but experience more joy and fulfillment ourselves.
It's like that saying, the more you give, the more you receive.
Exactly. And that generosity, that spirit, it's reflected in those two constant companions mentioned in the psalm, goodness and mercy. The source material highlighted that they're not just ideas, they're active forces, always with us, pursuing us, offering forgiveness.
It's such a comfort to know that no matter what we do, God's love and grace are always there. We're never beyond His compassion and forgiveness.
And it's that unconditional love that allows us to truly embrace the final promise of Psalm 23, dwelling in the house of the Lord forever. Knowing our ultimate destination is secure, that we are held in God's loving embrace now and for eternity.
We've covered so much ground already. From the concept of dwelling in the house of the Lord to the practical ways we can experience God's provision and abundance.
It's been such a rich conversation. Before we move into the final part of our exploration, I'm curious, what's really stood out to you so far? What's resonating in your heart?
I keep coming back to that image of the table. Being prepared right there in front of our enemies.
Yeah, it's powerful.
It's like such a strong reminder that God's provision isn't about, waiting for everything to be perfect. It's there even when things are tough.
It's a beautiful image of abundance, but also defiance, right? It's saying no matter what you're up against, you're taken care of. God's blessings are there.
And it connects to that whole idea we talked about of dwelling in the house of the Lord, not just as some future thing, but as something we can experience now.
Exactly. It's about cultivating that sense of security and belonging in our relationship with God right now, in the present moment, knowing we're held in His care no matter what.
And it's not passive either. It's not about just sitting back and waiting for things to happen.
No, it's an active choice. To trust, to surrender, to let God's presence into every part of our lives.
There's that line from the source material, I think it said, abundant living isn't about waiting for the perfect circumstances. It's about choosing to see God's hand in the midst of our current reality.
I love that. It's about actively seeking those green pastures and still waters, even when we're surrounded by, the demands of life, all the noise.
So it's not about escaping our problems or pretending everything's fine. It's about choosing a different perspective, focusing on God's provision, even when things are hard.
And remembering this whole process, this transformation into abundant living, it's a journey.
Right.
It's those small, consistent choices we make every day to align our hearts with God.
It's about recognizing we're always evolving, always growing, being refined by God's grace. It's not about reaching some perfect state, but about striving to become more like Christ.
And that process, well, it often includes those course corrections we talked about.
Yeah, the rod and the staff.
God's correction, it might be uncomfortable sometimes, but it's rooted in love. It's about guiding us back to the path that leads to life, to wholeness, to real fulfillment.
In that YouTube video, they said, God's discipline isn't about punishing us for our mistakes. It's about preventing us from making bigger ones.
Exactly. It's about helping us avoid those pitfalls and detours that take us away from the life God intends for us.
It's about trusting that He knows the path, even when we can't see it.
And as we walk that path, we're constantly being equipped with what we need to overcome those obstacles, to navigate the challenges. Remember that anointing we talked about, that sense of calling, of purpose. It's not just a one-time thing. God continually pours out His grace and gifts, equipping us for every good work.
And as our cups overflow with those blessings, we're called to share that abundance, to be conduits of His generosity, extending that love and grace to those around us.
It's recognizing that our blessings aren't just for us. They're meant to be shared, to make a difference in the world, to bring hope and healing to others.
Which brings me to one of the most powerful things about Psalm 23, I think. That even in the face of all the darkness, the fear, the uncertainty, we're never truly alone. God's goodness and mercy are always there.
Always.
Guiding us, offering forgiveness. It's a promise that goes beyond our time here on earth. A reminder that our ultimate destination is secure, that we are eternally held in God's love.
It's a beautiful truth.
So as we wrap up this exploration of Psalm 23, I'm just feeling this sense of hope and gratitude.
Me too.
Hope. Because no matter what's going on, we have a shepherd who's guiding us,
Yeah.
leading us toward those green pastures and still waters. And gratitude just for the reminder that God's provision is abundant, His grace is overflowing, and His love is mistake. Well, it never fails.
It's been a privilege to explore this psalm with you, unpacking its meaning and seeing how it can truly impact our lives.
And we hope this conversation has encouraged you to embrace the fullness of God's provision, to walk in the confidence of His love, and to share His abundance with others.
And remember, this is just the beginning. Keep exploring Psalm 23. Let its words speak to your heart, guide your steps.
Because it's not just some ancient text, it's a roadmap to a life filled with peace, purpose, and abundant joy. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
As we conclude this episode, let us wrap up the profound lessons hidden within Psalm 23. This timeless scripture is more than a poetic declaration. It's a guide to living a life rooted in trust, peace, and divine provision. Through David's imagery, we learn of God's intimate care as our shepherd, a guide who is personally invested in every aspect of our journey. Such insights encourage us to trust in His provision, even when life presents challenges. The key takeaway from Psalm 23 is that God's presence transforms our fears into confidence. The valley of the shadow of death, though daunting, is navigable when we lean on God's unwavering guidance. This is not merely about avoiding evil, but embracing the assurance that God walks with us, using His rod and staff to protect and guide us. These symbols remind us of His love and correction, essential tools for growth and safety. Another cornerstone of this psalm is its emphasis on rest and peace. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and leads me beside still waters, speak to the importance of finding spiritual renewal in God's presence. In today's world of endless hustle, these verses challenge us to pause, replenish, and trust in a peace that surpasses understanding, a peace rooted in God's stillness. Psalm 23 also highlights the abundance of God's blessings. From an overflowing cup to a table prepared in the presence of enemies, the imagery conveys that God's provision exceeds our needs. This abundance is a reminder that even amidst life's uncertainties, God equips us to not only survive but thrive, showered with blessings that affirm his limitless generosity. Restoration is a recurring theme in Psalm 23. The promise that He restores my soul invites us to surrender our brokenness to God. It's a call to trust in His transformative power, knowing that He doesn't just mend what's broken. He creates something far more beautiful. This restoration reflects God's ability to heal every wound, replace every regret, and instill hope for the future. Walking the path of righteousness is another profound element of Psalm 23. It is a journey shaped by obedience and alignment with God's will. While this path is not always easy, it is purposeful and leads to eternal rewards. The righteousness David describes is not about perfection but about consistently seeking God and allowing His character to shape ours.